If she had stayed silent for just 3 more seconds, hundreds of lives might have changed forever. The words would later appear in headlines across the country. But at 8:47 p.m. on a cool Thursday evening in downtown Chicago, nobody was thinking about headlines. Nobody was thinking about danger. Nobody except one young waitress standing near the back of a glittering ballroom, watching a billionaire walk toward a door he should never open. "Mr. Sterling, don't open that door." The voice cut through the room like lightning across a midnight sky. Conversation stopped. Crystal glasses froze halfway to waiting lips. The smooth notes of a jazz quartet seemed to vanish beneath the weight of a single sentence. More than 400 guests turned at once. At the center of the room, Ethan Sterling stopped walking. The billionaire CEO of Sterling Technologies stood with one hand resting on a polished brass handle. For a moment, he didn't move. Neither did anyone else. The silence felt impossible, heavy, suspended, like the entire ballroom had forgotten how to breathe. Naomi Carter stood 20 feet away, her chest rising quickly beneath the crisp black uniform of the Grand Monarch Hotel. Her eyes were locked on the door, not on Ethan, not on the shocked faces around her. The door. Her expression carried something deeper than panic. It carried certainty, the kind that only appears when someone sees a threat nobody else can see. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged confused glances. Investors whispered behind raised hands. Executives frowned. Hotel managers looked horrified. A waitress had just interrupted one of the most powerful men in America in front of an audience packed with politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. The annual Sterling Foundation Gala was supposed to be a celebration. Millions of dollars had already been pledged to education programs and community initiatives. News cameras lined the perimeter of the ballroom. Influencers streamed live updates from their tables. The evening had been carefully choreographed for weeks. Every light, every speech, every photograph, every detail designed to project success. And now everything had stopped because a waitress had shouted 6 words. Ethan slowly turned his head. At 41 years old, he had built one of the largest technology companies in the country. Financial networks analyzed his decisions. Investors followed his movements. Entire markets reacted to his words. Yet at that moment, standing beneath towering chandeliers worth more than most family homes, he looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man trying to understand what he had just heard. Naomi swallowed hard. The room watched her. Every eye, every camera, every judgment. But she didn't look away. The fear in her face wasn't fear for herself. That was what made the moment so unsettling. "Sir," she said again, her voice trembling slightly now, "please don't open that door." Somewhere near the front row, someone laughed nervously. Another guest shook his head. A hotel supervisor took a step forward, clearly preparing to intervene. After all, waitresses were not supposed to stop galas. They were not supposed to interrupt CEOs. They were certainly not supposed to challenge them in public. But Naomi remained exactly where she was. Because 20 minutes earlier, she had noticed something that nobody else had noticed. Something small, something strange. A detail so insignificant that almost anyone would have ignored it. Almost anyone. Yet that tiny detail had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. And over the next 20 minutes, that doubt had grown into certainty. Now the clock was running out. Ethan's hand remained on the brass handle. The ballroom remained frozen in suspense. And Naomi knew that if he opened the door before she could explain what she had seen, this elegant evening might become something nobody in that room would ever forget. 20 minutes earlier, the ballroom had looked exactly the way success imagined itself. Golden light spilled from enormous crystal chandeliers suspended 3 stories above the marble floor. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays balanced with impossible precision. Soft jazz drifted through the room like smoke. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glittered beneath a clear spring sky, thousands of city lights stretching toward the horizon. The Grand Monarch Hotel was known for hosting presidents, celebrities, and billionaires. Tonight, it hosted all 3. Naomi Carter adjusted a row of champagne flutes near the West Service Station and checked the seating chart one final time. It was only her 3rd month working at the hotel, but she had already learned an important lesson. In rooms like this, people noticed everything except the staff. Wealthy guests remembered who sat beside them. They remembered company valuations and stock prices. They remembered who gained influence and who lost it. But they rarely remembered the names of the people pouring their drinks. Naomi understood that. She had stopped taking it personally years ago. Growing up on the south side of Chicago had taught her that being overlooked sometimes gave you an advantage. Invisible people often notice things everyone else missed. The gala officially began at 8 o'clock. By 8:15, speeches filled the room. Cameras flashed. Investors mingled. Ethan Sterling moved through the crowd surrounded by board members, advisors, and reporters. Naomi watched him only because everyone else seemed to. He carried himself with quiet confidence. Not arrogant. Not friendly either. Simply focused. Like a man whose attention was constantly divided between 10 different problems. At 8:21, Naomi stepped into a service corridor connecting the ballroom to the executive wing. She was delivering an updated beverage request when something caught her attention. A man she had never seen before emerged from a restricted hallway. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. He wore a dark maintenance uniform. He carried a toolbox. Around his neck hung an employee badge. Yet something felt off. The man was moving too quickly. Not running. Not rushing. Just moving with the nervous energy of someone trying very hard not to attract attention. Naomi glanced toward the badge. The photo faced backward. Strange. Hotel employees were required to display identification clearly at all times. She continued walking. The man disappeared around a corner. Normally, that would have been the end of it. Except 30 seconds. Later, she noticed something else. The executive hallway should have been empty. Security protocols required guest access only. Yet one of the doors near the private conference suites stood slightly open. Just an inch. Barely noticeable. Naomi slowed her pace. Through the narrow opening, she caught a glimpse of movement. A shadow crossing the room. Then the door quietly clicked shut. She frowned. Perhaps a technician was setting up equipment for a meeting. Perhaps security had authorized access. There were dozens of innocent explanations. Still, the uneasy feeling remained. Back inside the ballroom, she returned to work. But the image stayed with her. The backward badge. The nervous walk. The partially opened door. At 8:29, another detail appeared. One of the hotel's senior engineers hurried through the ballroom carrying a tablet computer. His expression looked unusually tense. Naomi watched him disappear into the same executive corridor. 5 minutes later, he returned. This time he was alone. His face had turned pale. Before she could ask if he needed assistance, he pulled out a phone and spoke quietly to someone she could not see. Then he left through a side exit reserved for staff. Naomi never saw him come back. The knot in her stomach tightened. Around her, the celebration continued. Laughter echoed between marble columns. Champagne flowed. Investors discussed billion-dollar deals. Nobody seemed concerned. Nobody seemed to notice the small pieces beginning to form a pattern. But Naomi could not shake the feeling that something behind those elegant walls was not quite right. And as the minutes passed, that feeling only grew stronger. Most people would have dismissed it and gone back to work. Naomi tried. For several minutes, she forced herself to focus on serving guests, clearing glasses, and responding to requests. Yet every time she stepped onto the ballroom floor, her attention drifted back toward the executive corridor. Something inside her refused to let the matter go. Experience had taught her to trust that feeling. Naomi Carter was 26 years old, but responsibility had arrived much earlier than adulthood. Her father, Marcus Carter, had spent nearly 20 years as a firefighter for the city of Chicago. Growing up, Naomi heard stories that never appeared in newspapers. Stories about emergencies that began with tiny details everyone ignored. A strange smell. An unusual sound. A door left open. Marcus often told her that disasters rarely arrived without warning. The warnings were simply easy to overlook. Pay attention to what does not fit, he would say while helping her with homework at the kitchen table. Most people notice what belongs. Very few notice what does not. After his retirement, those words stayed with her. They followed her through college classes, part-time jobs, and difficult years when money was tight and opportunities felt distant. They became part of how she viewed the world. That was why the events of tonight bothered her so much. Nothing she had seen seemed dangerous on its own, but together they felt wrong. At 8:36, Naomi received a request from one of the event coordinators to bring bottled water to a preparation room near the executive suites. The assignment immediately drew her attention. It gave her a reason to return to the hallway without appearing suspicious. She loaded a silver tray and made her way toward the restricted area. The farther she walked from the ballroom, the quieter everything became. The music faded behind thick walls. The laughter disappeared. Plush carpeting softened every footstep. Soft lighting illuminated framed artwork worth more than most annual salaries. It felt like entering an entirely different world hidden behind the celebration. Naomi reached the preparation room and delivered the water. The coordinator thanked her without looking up from his tablet. As she turned to leave, she noticed something else. One of the electronic access panels mounted beside a conference room door displayed a blinking amber light. That was unusual. Earlier in the evening, every panel had glowed solid green. Naomi slowed. She was not an engineer. She did not know exactly what the light meant. Yet it became another piece of the puzzle collecting inside her mind. A few yards farther down the hallway, she heard voices. Instinctively, she paused near a decorative column. The conversation sounded hurried. One voice belonged to hotel security. The other belonged to someone she did not recognize. "I thought maintenance already cleared that area," the security officer said. "That is what I was told," the second voice replied. "Then who authorized access?" A brief silence followed. "I do not know." Footsteps approached. Naomi immediately continued walking before anyone could question why she was standing there. Her pulse quickened. The knot in her stomach tightened again. Back inside the ballroom, the celebration appeared untouched by any of it. Giant screens displayed charitable donation totals climbing higher by the minute. Applause erupted after every announcement. News anchors recorded segments beneath elegant lighting. Wealth and optimism filled every corner of the room. Yet Naomi could no longer enjoy the illusion. She kept noticing small things. A technician she did not recognize crossing the far side of the ballroom. An employee entrance opening briefly before closing again. Staff members exchanging confused glances. None of it proved anything. But together it created a growing sense of urgency she could not explain. Then, at exactly 8:42, she saw something that changed everything. Standing near the ballroom entrance was the same man with the backward identification badge. This time he was speaking quietly into a phone. His face remained partially hidden as guests moved between them. Naomi watched carefully. The conversation lasted only seconds. Then he glanced toward the executive corridor. Not once, twice, as if checking whether someone was approaching. The man ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and disappeared through a service door. Naomi immediately looked toward the corridor. At that exact moment, Ethan Sterling stepped away from a group of investors and began walking in the same direction. The moment Ethan Sterling stepped away from the investors, Naomi felt the uneasy sensation sharpen into something much stronger. Until then, every strange detail could still be explained away. A misplaced badge, a nervous employee, a blinking access panel. None of those things meant danger on their own. But now the pieces were beginning to move together. Ethan crossed the ballroom with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to having a schedule planned down to the minute. Several guests called his name as he passed. He smiled politely, shook a few hands, and continued forward. Whatever meeting awaited him beyond the executive corridor clearly mattered. Naomi set down the tray she was carrying and watched him disappear through the hallway entrance. Her pulse immediately quickened. Something about the timing felt wrong. The man with the backward badge had looked toward that same corridor only moments earlier. Then he had vanished. Now Ethan was heading there alone. Naomi tried to focus on her work. She picked up an empty glass. She answered a guest's request for sparkling water. She smiled when expected, but her attention remained fixed on the hallway entrance. A minute passed, then another. The knot in her stomach refused to loosen. Finally, she spotted Melissa Grant, one of the senior event coordinators. If anyone knew where Ethan was going, it would be her. Naomi approached carefully. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you know where Mr. Sterling went?" Melissa glanced up from her clipboard. "Private meeting. In the executive wing?" Melissa nodded distractedly. "Conference Suite 7. Naomi felt her chest tighten. Conference Suite 7. That was located at the far end of the restricted hallway, very close to the room where she had noticed the blinking access panel. "Who is he meeting with?" Naomi asked. Melissa frowned slightly. "I'm not sure. Something involving a donor presentation." Before Naomi could ask another question, Melissa was pulled away by a television producer needing assistance. The conversation ended there. Naomi looked toward the hallway again. Something about the answer bothered her. Throughout the evening, Every major meeting had appeared on the event schedule. Staff had received detailed instructions regarding guest movements and room assignments. Yet she could not remember seeing any donor presentation listed for Conference Suite 7. Perhaps she had simply missed it. Still, the doubt remained. At 8:44, she made a decision. She would walk past the corridor one more time. Nothing more. Just a quick look. If everything appeared normal, she would return to work and forget about it. The hallway felt even quieter than before. The distant music from the ballroom barely reached the executive wing. Naomi moved carefully across the plush carpet. As she approached the conference suites, she noticed another unusual detail. Conference Suite 6 stood dark and empty. Conference Suite 8 was locked, but Suite 7 displayed a small illuminated sign outside the door. Occupied. That should have reassured her. Instead, it raised more questions. The room was occupied, yet there were no assistants waiting outside. No security personnel. No event staff. For a meeting involving one of the most recognizable executives in America, the hallway felt strangely deserted. Then she heard it. A faint electronic sound. Barely audible. A brief chirp followed by silence. Naomi stopped walking. The noise had come from farther down the corridor, near the service access area where she had previously seen the unidentified maintenance worker. She listened carefully. Nothing. The hallway returned to complete silence. Her breathing grew shallow. Rationally, she knew she should leave. She was a waitress, not security. Not an investigator. Not an engineer. Yet every instinct told her something was wrong. As she turned toward the ballroom, another figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. It was the same security officer she had overheard earlier. Relief immediately washed over her. Finally, someone she could speak to. Naomi started toward him. But before she reached him, his phone rang. She watched as he answered, listened for several seconds, then suddenly changed direction. Whatever call he received seemed urgent. He entered a stairwell and disappeared from sight. Once again, the corridor stood empty. Completely empty. Naomi looked toward Conference Suite 7, then toward the service hallway, then back toward the ballroom entrance glowing with warm golden light. Every instinct told her to walk away. Yet something stronger told her she could not. Because if all these strange events were connected, Ethan Sterling was now walking directly into the center of them. Naomi stood motionless for a few seconds, caught between instinct and uncertainty. The hallway remained silent. The security officer was gone. The unidentified maintenance worker had vanished. And somewhere beyond the closed doors of the executive wing, Ethan Sterling continued toward a meeting that seemed to exist only on paper. The logical part of her mind urged caution. There was no proof, no evidence, only fragments. But another voice reminded her that warning signs rarely arrive neatly packaged. They appear as scattered pieces waiting for someone willing to connect them. Naomi slowly walked farther down the corridor. Every step felt heavier than the last. The soft carpet muted her footsteps as she passed framed photographs of Chicago landmarks illuminated by warm accent lighting. Everything looked elegant. Everything looked normal. Yet the tension inside her continued to build. As she approached the service access area, she noticed something resting on a housekeeping cart parked against the wall. At first it seemed insignificant. Then she stopped. One of the maintenance logs attached to the cart displayed today's date. Naomi glanced at it casually. The executive wing inspection had supposedly been completed at 6 o'clock that evening. Every checkpoint carried a signature except one. Conference Suite 7. The box remained blank. Her pulse quickened. That made no sense. If the room had not been cleared, why was Ethan meeting someone there? Naomi looked around. The hallway remained empty. She carefully returned the clipboard exactly where she found it and continued walking. A few feet ahead, another detail caught her attention. One of the service doors had failed to close completely. A narrow gap remained between the frame and the latch. Soft light spilled through the opening. Naomi hesitated before gently pushing it wider. Inside was a small utility room filled with cleaning supplies, spare equipment, and electrical control panels. Nothing appeared unusual. Then she noticed a disposable coffee cup sitting on a metal shelf. Fresh steam still rose from the opening. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. Naomi stepped closer. Beside the cup lay a folded sheet of paper. She had no intention of snooping, but a single word visible on the page immediately froze her in place. Sterling. Her eyes widened. The document appeared to be a printed event schedule. Most of the text was hidden beneath the fold. Yet one line remained visible. Private presentation. Conference Suite 7. 8:45 p.m. Naomi checked her watch. 8:45. Exactly now. She looked at the room again. Whoever left the document behind was gone. The coffee remained warm. The timing felt impossible to ignore. Suddenly voices echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the utility room wall. Naomi could not make out the words. Only fragments. A brief conversation. Then silence. Moments later she heard a door open and close somewhere farther down the corridor. Her stomach dropped. Ethan had likely arrived. The meeting had begun. Naomi quickly stepped back into the hallway. Her thoughts raced. If this presentation was legitimate, she risked embarrassing herself by interfering. She could lose her job. She could become the story instead of preventing one. Yet every clue pointed in the same direction. Missing personnel, confused security staff, unfinished inspections, an unidentified worker, restricted access, an unscheduled meeting. The pattern had become impossible to dismiss. Then one final detail changed everything. Mounted near the ceiling at the end of the hallway was a digital monitoring screen displaying building systems information. Naomi glanced toward it as she turned to leave. Instantly she stopped. One section of the display flashed amber. Executive Wing Access Control Override Active. She stared at the message. Even without technical training, she understood what those words meant. Someone had altered access permissions in the executive wing. Someone had done it recently, and nobody in the ballroom seemed to know. For the first time all evening, uncertainty disappeared. Fear remained. Questions remained. But doubt was gone. Naomi looked toward the closed door of Conference Suite 7. Then she started moving quickly in that direction, knowing she had only minutes left before whatever was happening behind those walls reached its conclusion. Naomi's pace quickened as she moved through the executive corridor. The elegant calm of the hotel now felt deceptive, like a polished surface hiding something underneath. The amber warning on the monitoring screen remained burned into her mind. Access Control Override Active. Someone had changed permissions in one of the most secure areas of the building, and nobody seemed to be responding. Ahead of her, Conference Suite 7 remained closed. Warm light glowed beneath the door. Naomi could hear faint voices inside, though the words were impossible to make out. She stopped several feet away and tried to think clearly. If she interrupted a legitimate meeting between Ethan Sterling and a major donor, her career at the Grand Monarch Hotel could end before midnight. But if she walked away and her instincts were right, she would never forgive herself. She looked around one last time, hoping to find someone with authority. A manager, a security officer, anyone. The hallway remained empty. Then her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. It was a message from another server asking for help in the ballroom. Under normal circumstances, she would have responded immediately. Tonight she ignored it. Her attention was suddenly drawn to a small maintenance access door farther down the corridor. The door had not been there in her memory moments earlier. Or perhaps she simply had not noticed it. Either way, it now stood slightly open. Naomi approached cautiously. Beyond the doorway was a narrow equipment passage used by engineers and maintenance crews. The space was brightly lit and lined with utility panels. As she stepped closer, she noticed a portable access terminal sitting on a rolling cart. A screen remained active. Someone had left it running. Naomi glanced at the display and immediately froze. She did not understand most of the technical information scrolling across the screen, but one line stood out clearly. Executive Wing Temporary Authorization. User identity not verified. Her stomach dropped. Beneath the warning appeared a timestamp. 8:42 p.m. Only minutes ago. Naomi stared at the screen. This was no longer a collection of strange coincidences. Someone without proper authorization had gained access to the executive wing systems. Before she could process the information further, voices echoed from deeper inside the maintenance passage. Naomi immediately stepped back into the shadows. Two men appeared around a corner. One wore a maintenance uniform, the same uniform she had seen earlier. The backward badge, the nervous walk, the hurried phone call. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The second man wore a dark suit. Neither noticed her. Everything is set, the suited man said quietly. The presentation starts in less than 2 minutes. The maintenance worker nodded. Then nobody should interfere. Naomi felt a chill run through her body. She waited until both men disappeared through a secured exit before moving again. Every instinct now screamed the same warning. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She left the passage and hurried back toward Conference Suite 7. At the far end of the corridor, she finally spotted Ethan Sterling. He had exited the suite and was walking toward another door located near a private presentation room connected to the executive wing. A small group of guests followed several steps behind him. Apparently, the meeting was transitioning elsewhere. Naomi's heart sank. Whatever was happening had not ended. It was still unfolding. Ethan stopped in front of a large walnut door with brass trim. One of the most secure rooms in the hotel. The private presentation room. Several guests gathered nearby. A photographer adjusted his camera. Event staff prepared for what appeared to be a special announcement. Everything looked normal. Everything looked professional. Yet Naomi knew what nobody else in that hallway knew. Unauthorized access had occurred. Security staff were missing. A suspicious worker remained somewhere inside the building. And now Ethan Sterling was reaching for another door. The same uneasy certainty that had followed her all evening suddenly became overwhelming. She could feel the seconds slipping away. She could feel a decision approaching. Across the hallway, Ethan placed his hand on the brass handle. The guests smiled expectantly. Cameras turned toward him. Nobody saw danger. Nobody felt urgency. Nobody except Naomi Carter. And in that moment, she realized that if she wanted to stop what she believed was about to happen, she had only one chance left. The distance between Naomi and Ethan Sterling could not have been more than 20 feet. Yet in that moment, it felt impossible to cross. Time seemed to slow. The guests standing nearby smiled politely, unaware of the storm building beneath the surface of an otherwise flawless evening. Camera operators adjusted their angles. Event staff reviewed schedules. Investors exchanged quiet conversation. Nobody noticed the fear spreading across Naomi's face. Ethan's fingers tightened around the brass handle. One simple movement, and the door would open. Naomi felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every warning sign from the past 20 minutes rushed through her mind at once. The unidentified worker. The unauthorized access. The missing inspection. The strange meeting. The maintenance terminal. The whispered conversation. Separately, they meant little. Together, they formed a picture she could no longer ignore. Her body moved before her doubts could stop her. Mr. Sterling. The words echoed through the hallway. Several heads turned immediately. Ethan paused and looked over his shoulder. Naomi took another step forward. Her breathing felt uneven. Every eye in the corridor was suddenly on her. Please stop. Confusion spread across the faces of nearby guests. One executive frowned. A photographer lowered his camera. Ethan stared at her, clearly trying to understand why a hotel waitress was interrupting a private presentation. Is there a problem? He asked calmly. Naomi swallowed hard. She knew how ridiculous she sounded. She had no report, no official authority. No evidence she could hold in her hands. Only instinct and a chain of suspicious events. Yet her father's voice echoed in her memory. Pay attention to what is not fit. I do not think that room is safe, she said. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that makes people uncomfortable. Several guests exchanged skeptical glances. One man laughed. Softly, as if assuming there had been a misunderstanding. Ethan remained polite, but his expression hardened slightly. What are you talking about? Naomi hesitated. For a brief second, she questioned herself. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe fear had connected unrelated events into something larger than reality. Then she remembered the message on the monitoring screen. User identity not verified. Access control override active. No, she could not ignore that. Something is wrong in the executive wing, she said. I think someone accessed areas they were not supposed to access. The photographer looked confused. An event coordinator stepped forward. Naomi, this is not the time. Her voice carried both embarrassment and warning. Naomi knew exactly what that meant. Stop talking. Return to work. Do not make a scene. But another sound interrupted the moment. A faint electronic chirp. Soft. Brief. Barely audible. Yet Naomi recognized it immediately. It was identical to the sound she had heard earlier near the restricted hallway. Her eyes snapped toward the door. Every instinct inside her screamed. Please, she said, her voice stronger now. Do not open it. The hallway froze. Ethan looked from Naomi to the door and back again. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in his expression. Not fear. Not panic. Simply doubt. and doubt was enough. "What exactly did you see?" he asked. Before Naomi could answer, another voice echoed from behind the crowd. "Hold on." Everyone turned. It was the security officer who had disappeared earlier. He moved quickly through the corridor carrying a radio. His face looked far more serious than before. The room instantly changed. The laughter vanished. The casual smiles disappeared. The officer approached Ethan and spoke quietly into his ear. Nobody else could hear the words, but everyone saw Ethan's expression change. The confidence drained from his face. The officer then glanced directly at the door and nodded once. A long, tense moment passed. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Ethan slowly removed his hand from the brass handle. And for the first time that night, Naomi realized she might not have been imagining any of it at all. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The hallway remained suspended in a strange silence that felt heavier than any speech delivered that evening. Ethan Sterling stood motionless beside the door while the security officer listened to updates coming through his radio. Guests watched with growing confusion. What had started as an awkward interruption was becoming something entirely different. Naomi could see it in their faces. The skepticism was fading. Questions were taking its place. The officer stepped away briefly and spoke into the radio again. His voice remained low, but his urgency was impossible to miss. Additional security personnel appeared at the far end of the corridor moments later. They moved quickly but calmly, avoiding panic among the guests. One of them carried a tablet displaying building systems information. Another headed directly toward the access panel beside the presentation room. Ethan glanced toward Naomi. For the first time all night, he was not looking at her as a hotel employee. He was looking at her as someone who might know something he did not. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. Naomi took a breath and explained what she had seen. The maintenance worker with the backward badge. The unfinished inspection record. The unauthorized access warning. The abandoned terminal in the maintenance passage. The strange conversation she overheard. As she spoke, the expressions around her changed. No longer dismissive. No longer amused. People were beginning to understand why she had taken such a risk. When she finished, the security officer looked at the technician beside him. The technician nodded immediately. "We found a regular access activity," he confirmed. "Someone used temporary credentials that cannot be verified through our system." A ripple of concern spread through the hallway. The officer turned toward Ethan. "Sir, we recommend postponing the presentation until we complete a full inspection." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Do it." The order changed everything. Security teams moved into action. Guests were politely redirected toward the ballroom. Event staff received instructions through earpieces. Within minutes, the corridor transformed from a ceremonial entrance into an active investigation zone. Naomi stepped back, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. The adrenaline that had carried her through the evening was beginning to fade. She watched as specialists examined the access systems and reviewed security footage. Then one of the technicians called the security officer over. The man's eyes widened as he reviewed the screen. Another officer joined him. A third. None of them looked pleased. Ethan noticed immediately. "What did you find?" The technician turned the tablet so everyone could see. Security footage displayed the unidentified maintenance worker entering restricted areas multiple times throughout the evening. In several clips, he appeared to be using credentials that did not belong to him. More importantly, the timestamps matched the exact moments Naomi had noticed unusual activity. The hallway fell silent again. Not because of fear this time. Because of realization. Naomi had been right. The warning signs had been real. The access irregularities were real. The threat to the event had not been imagined. One of the officers explained that while the investigation was still underway, the unauthorized system changes could have affected security protocols inside several executive areas. Opening the presentation room before completing verification would have created serious uncertainty regarding guest safety and building operations. Ethan slowly looked toward the closed door, then back toward Naomi. The distance between a billionaire chief executive and a waitress from the hotel floor suddenly seemed much smaller than before. Around them, reporters and guests had started hearing fragments of what happened. Whispers spread rapidly through the ballroom. People wanted answers. They wanted to know why the event had paused, why security had mobilized, why a waitress had become the center of attention. Yet Naomi stood quietly near the wall, almost uncomfortable with the attention. She had not acted to become a hero. She had acted because she could not ignore what did not fit. And that simple decision had changed the entire course of the evening. By 10 o'clock that evening, the investigation had spread far beyond the executive corridor. Security specialists reviewed access records. Hotel administrators coordinated with authorities. Event organizers worked to reassure guests. Yet the conversation everyone seemed to be having centered on one unexpected person. Naomi Carter, the waitress who had refused to stay silent. Naomi, meanwhile, wanted nothing more than to return to her responsibilities and disappear back into the background. She helped clear tables. She assisted guests. She carried trays through the ballroom exactly as she had done earlier that night. But something had changed. People looked at her differently now. Some offered quiet smiles. Others thanked her as she passed. A few simply nodded with a new sense of respect. The woman who had been nearly invisible at the beginning of the gala had become impossible to overlook. Near the center of the ballroom, Ethan Sterling stood speaking with security officials and senior executives. Several times during the evening his eyes drifted toward Naomi. Each time, he appeared deep in thought. Eventually, the final investigation update arrived. The unauthorized access had been confirmed. Multiple restricted systems had been altered using credentials that did not belong to authorized personnel. Because the issue had been identified before the presentation proceeded, security teams were able to isolate the affected areas and prevent further complications. The hotel remained safe. The guests remained safe. The evening continued. But the outcome could have been very different had the warning signs gone unnoticed. Shortly before the gala concluded, Ethan stepped onto the main stage. Conversations gradually faded. Hundreds of guests turned toward him. Cameras focused on the podium. The giant screens behind him displayed the foundation logo against a backdrop of Chicago's skyline. Everyone expected a closing speech about donations, partnerships, and future initiatives. Instead, Ethan surprised them. "Tonight," he began, "I learned something important." The room fell silent. "I learned that experience matters. Training matters. Technology matters. But sometimes the most valuable thing in a room is a person willing to pay attention when everyone else is distracted." Several guests exchanged curious glances. Ethan continued, "Many of us spend our lives looking upward. We pay attention to titles, positions, and influence. We assume the most important voices belong to the most powerful people. Tonight proved that assumption wrong." Then he looked directly toward Naomi. Hundreds of eyes followed his gaze. Naomi froze beside a service station near the back of the ballroom. A member of this hotel's staff noticed details the rest of us missed. She trusted her instincts when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Because of her courage, concerns were identified before they could become serious problems. And for that, I am deeply grateful. Applause began slowly. Then it grew. Louder. Stronger. Soon the entire ballroom was standing. Naomi felt heat rise to her face. She had never experienced anything like it. She had not acted for recognition. She had acted because something felt wrong. Yet here she stood while hundreds of successful people applauded her judgment. Ethan stepped down from the stage and crossed the ballroom. When he reached her, the applause finally softened. "Thank you," he said simply. Not as a billionaire speaking to an employee. Not as a chief executive speaking to a waitress. Just one human being speaking to another. Naomi smiled. "I was just paying attention." Ethan nodded. That is exactly why it mattered. Long after the guests departed and the chandeliers dimmed, those words remained. Because the truth was simple. Naomi did not have authority. She did not have wealth. She did not have influence. What she had was something rarer. The courage to trust what she saw when nobody else was looking. And on a night filled with power, prestige, and privilege, that courage became the most valuable thing in the entire building.